Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Gray, the creative director of the New York Times live conversation, screening, and performance series, TimesTalks. For 20 years, TimesTalks has paired New York Times journalists with the brightest and boldest creative minds from the fields of film, theater, music, art, fashion, architecture, design, and social justice. Today, we are pleased to present our first ever Art and Design Festival, 3 provocative conversations exploring the intersection of art, architecture, fashion, and design, produced in collaboration with New York City by Design. I would like to give a special thanks to our sponsor, Growy, and to share the following brief video message. Okay, now down to business. I'm delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's event, featuring a prolific architect who has designed everything from hotels to restaurants and performance spaces, and the renowned Cuban-American fashion designer who was best known for designing Michelle Obama's 2009 inauguration dress. Moderating today's conversation is the fashion director and chief fashion critic for the New York Times, who leads global fashion coverage for both the Times and its international edition. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to our moderator, Vanessa Friedman, and our very special guests, David Rockwell and Isabel Toledo.
Those are your fans.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm pretty excited. It's an honor to be here with you guys and with 2 of what I think are probably the most independent creative minds working today. One who focuses on the space around the body, one who focuses on what goes on the body, but both of whom have really pioneered their own unique paths in what we might sometimes call seemingly homogenous industries. And interestingly enough, I discovered they both started their businesses the same year, right? 1984. So you got to wonder what was going on in the world at that point. But to begin, I'd like to ask both of you how you define design. What does it mean to you, and where does it maybe diverge from how other people would define it?
For me, design is problem solving, and I think I approach everything from the point of view that there's something to fix, and that drives what it is that I'm going to develop. Design is the order of things. It's how I can take chaos and make it work. It's how I take fabrics that don't quite work together and figure out a design that will bring them together. For me, it's never about how does it look, or is it good looking? It's about is it working? I think in fashion, that's where I'm kind of different, because I'm driven by design much more than fashion.
Mm-hmm. David?
Well, it's a big question. It's an essay question. I think what intrigues me most about design is the ability to create environments that connect people. And there's many different interpretations of what design is, but what drove me to design was understanding that the built environment, the things immediately around us, affect how you relate to other people. And that was sort of my way into it. I've also come more and more to believe that design is about something a lot of architects and designers don't really talk about, which is creating a moment of delight, making the world sort of more understandable, but also stepping out of a virtual community into a connection.
I mean, both of what both of you are saying also touches on the idea of kind of manipulating experience, right? Like affecting how people feel in a space or wearing something. I mean, is that something you understood from the beginning? Is it something you learned?
I think I absolutely feel that I want to affect how you're standing, how you're sitting. I want to affect your emotion because I know that the fabric is going to make you feel a certain way. If it's tight around here, if you're showing your legs, if the fabric is touching your legs, you react. And I know that that's happening. I know it's going to happen. So I am a little bit in control of what you are about to be doing, or your body language, basically, which is, and also it's important for me in design and fashion to be exposed to what effect you're going to have when you walk into a space. Because I know I've been to many of your places, and there's even the feeling many times that I want to take off my shoes and walk barefoot. I mean, that's something that that communication, that friendly feeling, you absolutely have in your work. And it's interesting because you do manipulate an emotion in people.
Is that what you're going for? Barefoot delight?
I'm going to go barefoot.
Well, it's so funny you'd say that because I do think about stepping into a place and feeling that sort of moment of a combination of familiar and surprise. That you feel like you really want to participate in it. So I love the idea of like a no shoes environment. So much of what we're doing involves telling a story, and much like I know you and I were talking before, that research, that kind of understanding of what that story is, has to start before you get the project.
Right.
And the other thing that I love doing is creating places that have an element of surprise, and that comes from many different things: sense of touch, sense of smell. After 25 years of doing Nobu, I think the one design element where I started with that was in talking to Nobu Matsuhisa, who I met actually when I was doing an event for Meals on Wheels as a volunteer, lashing some moon up on the ceiling for a feast. And,
how old were you?
Well, it was
3.
Well, I'm 25 now, so it was 25 years ago, so I was 35. And I tried his food. I pursued getting the project, went through the whole process of, but as I started to design it, where I started was the tabletop. Because I felt there was something about his use of raw ingredient that was so special, that scorching the tabletop so you didn't take your shoes off, but you did want to touch the table.
We actually, I think we've got a picture of that restaurant, so why don't we show the slide for that Nobu.
Oh, yeah.
Visual aids are good.
So, this was, first of all, there was no sense at the time when I was doing it that this was going to be a significant turn in my career and in I think, food. And as I started researching Nobu, as you do, the more I found out his life experience in Peru explained so much to me about not only the sense of taste, but the sense of color, that kind of saffron color. But the use of the raw ingredient, celebrating it, made me start the design with these tabletops with nothing on them where you engage a sense of touch. So kind of the way into a project is unpredictable, and I think that's what makes it so joyful is you don't know where you're going to begin. You sort of take it all in, and then you try and have a thought about how to communicate what makes the experience of being there special.
How radical.
The surprise element in fashion, you can get in trouble. It can't be too surprising on the body. You can do a presentation of a fashion show that's surprising, but once a woman is going to buy a garment, she has to feel very familiar.
Okay, well, let's look at that. Talk about fashion shows.
I chose this, funny enough, because Bill Cunningham took that picture, and that was the first show I did in Paris in 1990, when things were really tough in New York. And we said, let's go to Paris and show in Paris. The year before we went, and we met a few people, and in fact, the designer that helped us do the fashion show there was, oh my goodness, Frank Joseph Bastille, you must know. And we met, this was the summer before, we went with the Visionaire kids, and We stayed there for about a month, and things were so hard in New York that we said, maybe we'll try showing here. And Frank Joseph said, sure. Right before we left, we said, okay, let's make a pact. You show in Paris, I'll show in Paris, you help me, and I'll help you when you go to New York. And sure, actually, Eddie Slimane was his public relations guy. I mean, that's how far back this goes. And we decided to show in Paris, and I remember we used his studio to get changed and do the hair and his atelier. And then we took the courtyard to go across to the cafe, and it started to rain. And it was an early morning show, and it was only Bill Cunningham that had an umbrella. And he passed every single girl across that courtyard. And later on, he would tell me, I don't have but this picture, because I could not take pictures. I was holding the umbrella. Oh, and why I picked this too, because it goes back to my beginning in fashion, or before fashion, which is when I worked at the Met. And my reaction to working at the Met, as a sewer, as a person that could make garments, was I'm surrounded by the masters. I'm surrounded by then history, all the incredible history in clothing. And I felt, what do I have to say? How do I make a difference? That surprise element in a way for me was, how do I make a garment that hasn't existed or that there's no pattern to it? And I started creating garments that were not draped traditionally. It was all about these kites and being abstract about the form and about how I'm dressing the form and how I'm creating these movable parts that if you put your arm down, the silhouette changes back and front. It was a lot of math in a way, not so much the look of it. And when I went to Paris, going back to Paris, that changed my perspective of fashion again, because pre-Paris, I was doing elementary shapes. It was all about this non-body garment. I was really driven by making things that were abstract. It was abstract shapes. And when I went to Paris, I felt the architecture, back to the architecture in Paris, it made me understand all those clothes that I had seen at the Met. And the exquisiteness of fashion, which I was very American. It was all about industry, and the seams were all cover stitch. It was different. It was a different feeling.
How hard was it to do, these things that were slightly radical, whether it was, making a plain tabletop, which now seems so like, of course you would do that. Of course that would be attractive, but that maybe wasn't at the time. Like, how hard is it to do something that other people are saying, God, you're crazy. Why would you do that?
Well, I think in some ways, I think you need to start with kind of what it is you believe. You said what it is you could add to the equation. I think in our case, it's a question of what is the prime interest in creating a space. And early on for me, I was fascinated less with how things were permanent than how they moved and transformed. I moved around a lot as a kid. Theater influenced me. We had a lot of different homes, lots of sudden transitions. And I think that as I started to work in architecture and environments, I found that the temporal or the ephemeral, which tends to be overlooked, drove so much of the impact of the space.
So, let's look at that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in my work in the city in restaurants, as I said before, was kind of an accident. My interest was in theater. I studied at Syracuse, then I went to London and studied there, and it reignited my interest in theater. I came back, had a few jobs, and did a restaurant that had to be built and designed and built in about 5 weeks, La Perigord.
And stand up.
And of course, at 23 or 24, I said, no problem. And that began work in restaurants, not because I had a particular insight to restaurants, but I think I was interested in how people connect in a space and combining those things that are permanent and those things that create incredible memories. In some ways, restaurants are like memory machines. The viewing platform came about just post 9/11. I was approached like 3 days after. We live in Lower Manhattan. I live in Tribeca. We work in Lower Manhattan. Our studio was not only devastated, but really paralyzed in thinking how irrelevant creating places for pleasure was given what was going on. And I got a call from the principal at PS 234 saying, could I help make the new school these kids were moving to more uplifting, less depressing? And it was really a cathartic moment of bringing together a lot of other artists, Tom Otterness, Myra Kalman, like an urban barn raising. After that, the next week, I got a call from the city asking if we would participate in creating a viewing platform at Ground Zero for visiting dignitaries. It was a time in which architects were speculating what should be rebuilt. And there were a group of architects, Liz Diller and Rick Scafidio and Kevin Kennan, and a whole group who felt like it was really obscene to be speculating what should be rebuilt before anyone could see what really happened. So my response was we would create a public viewing platform. And the response from the city was, that's great, but you have to raise the money privately for a whole series of technical reasons. And we said, okay. And we had to finish it by the end of the administration before. Wow. So we raised the money and built this viewing platform, which was a powerful experience because it was the first time I ever realized as an architect, you have the ability to go out and make things happen. You can be proactive about connecting various things. So it was an incredibly powerful, transformative experience that led to, a whole bunch of other things, including the playground in Lower Manhattan. Out of realizing that the power to kind of rally forces to make something is something you can generate.
But this is also, this wasn't meant to be forever, right? This was a...
No, this was meant to be temporary, and it was up for, I think, about 7 or 8 months. Oh. And was really the first chance for people to, witness what happened there.
Which is, it's an interesting kind of concept for an architect, because when most people think of buildings, they think of things that are meant to be there forever, that are sort of...
Well, yeah, I think that forever can be very paralyzing. And it's like... I
love forever.
Forever's a good idea, but...
I love forever.
It's like clients...
I build a T-shirt thinking it's forever.
But clients who are going for timeless... But I totally... Forget, you have to be timely first. You have to be of your moment. And
you're a great observer, though. It's why you can just...
And think about the theater experiences. They're only there the 2.5 hours you're there, but they're strong, strong memories. So, in our work, I think we began by embracing the power of temporary. Now, moving back into theater, I'm even more convinced that it's important. It's an important factor that's overlooked.
Well, it's interesting
why I say forever, and here he is, the architect, and he's saying the moment, and here I am, cloth, soft architecture, forever. It's totally the opposite. That's where we are.
But
we bring our own,
You can have both. You can create something that is temporarily in the moment, but also has a sort of indelible, forever effect. Like this.
Yeah, that was forever.
It was forever, but...
Still here. It's still here.
But she only wore it in public once.
Yes.
So
yes.
Talk about
that was an amazing moment. It totally, I would think it cosmically changed my life. Cosmically, totally changed my life.
How?
It was like having a sea of love coming at you, bouncing off the cells. It was incredible, really incredible. It was a moment that absolutely everyone felt. I don't care what side you were on, you had that feeling that America was moving forward. It had so much meaning. And I'm so proud to have been able to address it, to give it that shape, that form, that color.
Why
which I was reacting, because for many reasons. One was that behind them was going to be a lot of blues and blacks and reds. So, you know, and everybody thought it was a yellow, and it was really a sage. It was yellowish sage. And that was a moment of wanting to be a surprise, wanting to have a color also that not one person could tell what it was. That's why I did it in lace. It was a washed lace, a shrunken lace. And it was very warm. And I wanted everybody to react to it and not know exactly what it was that they were looking at. It was the future. You couldn't, people reacted and saw a whole different color, depending on which way you were looking at it. And everything I thought of putting into this dress, it magnified even more.
So you have a moment like that. Mm-hmm. The pressure on you to somehow leverage that into a bigger business or opportunities must be quite great. How do you then...
Not while you're doing it.
...remain true to yourself? Like, how do you, not get kind of sucked into the hype around it?
Ruben and Isabel, we're not very easily hyped in.
I remember opening night of Hairspray, which was the second Broadway show I did. And it was like an unbelievable joyride. Although in Seattle, talk about temporary, the first preview ever in Seattle, overture goes on, the bed comes out, automation stops, and the thing freezes. I was looking for like a Flexeril or something for my back. Stage manager came on the mic and said, we're going to reset it. They went back and reset it, and the audience went insane because they had seen a totally unplanned, unique moment.
Yeah, of course.
So for all of our planning, so it was this incredible joyride. And I remember opening night in New York, the director, Jack O'Brien, who's very wise, put his arm around me and he said, so here's my advice. You have to get really far away from this because it's never going to be like this again.
Wow.
So I think part of what you do is you go do something else. You go do something you're unfamiliar with, and you find a way to take a creative risk that that doesn't linearly follow what you did. But that advice really stayed with me.
Yeah, that's very good. I mean, for us...
I didn't. I went every night for months.
Feel the joy over and over. I couldn't do that but one moment. I think a lot of things came from this moment for us. I mean, all these mass market companies came and approached us for us to design collections for them, which was wonderful. And those things last like 3 years sometimes, 6 months, whatever it was. But it really did make a big difference in our business. We've been expressing the feeling for a long time about this moment. I mean, everybody wants to know about it. People always tell you what it was that they were doing during this time. Mm-hmm. So even if...
I think you and Ruben stand for always new anyway. So I think it was casting. It was like the right person.
Planning is not... I plan, unlike Ruben, who doesn't plan anything. I plan, but then I drop everything, and I don't want to remember. Like even coming today, I didn't want to know the questions. It was like, I just want to get there and feel the moment. That I'm really good at. I can fly. I feel the energy. That's the one thing that I have, the theater. I can't stand the stage. I'm totally frightened of it, but I love the energy of people.
Okay, so speaking of theater.
Yeah.
It is something that connects both of you. I know you've actually, David recommended Isabel for
a lot
for something.
My godfather.
I'm interested in how you see sort of narrative and experience as as it exists in a theatrical context, working with your day jobs, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Well, that's a picture of She Loves Me, which was my 20th Broadway show.
Tony Award winning.
Won the Tony Award.
Yeah.
I was going to bring it today just in case it didn't come up. Oh, look at what's this? It's right here. I think there's this similarity. I think the similarity between theater and architecture is you're creating a world And I think there's some really interesting overlaps with, for instance, sense of entrance, right? I love looking at what happens when the curtain lifts up and you're introduced to a world. And that's what really happens when you enter a building.
Right.
You know, you look at beautifully choreographed sequences, and they certainly embrace ideas from theater, and it's always been the laboratory and the testing ground. As an architect, for me, was going to the theater. The leap to get into designing theater was about a 4-year period of time, and I had a godfather too. It was a guy named Jules Fisher, who's an extraordinary lighting designer, who's been a friend of mine. I actually, when I was in school, reached out to him to research a project. We'd go to the theater a lot, and when I'd critique the sets, he'd say, well, if you're so smart, why aren't you doing that?
I love it.
And I said, you know, I feel like I'm just too deep into my business and my career. And he said, just start to meet with directors. So he set up interviews. For 4 years, I met with directors. I sketched for free. Wow. And I recognized that what a theater director wants is a designer who can help them get from place to place. Yes, you're creating, you know, in this case, it's Budapest in the 30s, but the real magic is when music, dance, storytelling, and the set are all unfolding in a special way. And She Loves Me was just totally magical on every level, in that every part about it felt like it was driven by a love of this period and this music. And another interesting thing about it is the amount of people it takes to make one thing move is similar to architecture, where architects, you know, present themselves as the auteurs, but there are hundreds of people that go into everything moving. If a stagehand and the stage manager doesn't test every automation access before the show, it doesn't work.
Yeah, that I've learned now being in the theater. It's incredible, all the pieces.
And that's true. And
work.
Most people don't think about in a restaurant, if the food gets to the table and it's cold, it could be that the architect didn't put the kitchen, the service station, you know, there's the sort of choreography of a space that now allows that play to happen.
It's funny because I do dress for the architecture. I do want to know if my fabric is going to sit well on that chair, if the door is not big enough for my skirt. I mean, these are things that I do. So in theater, I'm constantly now being able to push those boundaries more because I can be theatrical. Because I'm not very theatrical by nature. Not me, but the clothes I make are quite real. I don't necessarily, but in theater, I've been able to be theatrical and push those buttons.
Like that?
Ha ha! I didn't know you were putting this one. Wynton Marsalis. I mean, this is an amazing group of people for After Midnight, which got the Tony for the choreographer, and I was nominated. Yeah, it was my first, thanks to the man over here.
I was obsessed that Isabel should.
Oh my God, to see dancing dresses.
This is a good story. Wait, tell the story.
So a friend of mine who's a theater producer called me and said, I'm doing this thing called After Midnight. Where was it before? Was it Encores?
Yeah.
And we're moving the production, we're inheriting the production, and it's terrific. But I think it needs some magic for Broadway. And we had been talking about theater for years, and I said, you've got to call Isabel and Ruben.
Incredible.
And I remember some unbelievable.
And he kept it quiet.
But you didn't get everyone in the theater. I'll tell you, every person working in the theater world in terms of costumes paid attention to what happened on that stage.
Well, I mean, I got so much love back also from the actors, all the singers, all the dancers, because I was really involved in making their movements go even further. I mean, it was finally about seeing that fabric dance and having those dancers do what they wanted to do with it.
How different is it designing for a theatrical production versus, you know, a private person?
Because this has to be every night. It has to take the sweat. It has to be washed. It has to be practical. It cannot get in the way of a dancer.
Does it also have to read quite far?
Absolutely.
So do you have to exaggerate things? Do you?
You know, it's funny you say that because my conversation is with the actor. And I feel that if I make them feel that it's helping them, they're going to be able to project even more. And the dress or whatever they're wearing doesn't have to be so loud. The actor comes through even more. But I don't I don't necessarily think of it, although when I do go to the tech time, I do sit really far back to see what I'm looking at. And I am creating a painting, so I'm seeing it as a painting from far as well, but I'm much more concerned with the actor feeling really great and feeling that that garment was made for them and that it's going to make their performance greater. And that's what really the audience is feeling, I think.
One overlap I hadn't thought about with that, but when you're creating a restaurant, that same environment for a lesser chef doesn't work. You know, it has to be so integrated that the people working there believe that it grows out of them, which is a...
Yeah, you take into account the person's emotion.
How much of your jobs are being a psychiatrist or psychology?
In a fashion show, it is your work. You don't have to worry about what the model's feeling. I mean, they are a hanger in a weird way. Although I used to love when the girls had character. I mean, that's how far back we go. When the women came out and really reacted to the garments and had a conversation almost with their audience. But, I'm sorry, now I blanked out.
Therapist.
Therapist, oh, there you go, I need one. You know, I just try to make people feel good and confident, but
you don't spend a huge amount of time thinking about what their
I spend a lot of time making a great garment. Somehow I get so involved in making this object have all those elements. If I'm doing it for one specific person, I am taking into account their aura, really. You do feel this person, how they walk, how they stand, what kind of heels do they wear, what their comforts, and you do that and you create the garment. But then I put them in front of the mirror and they have to own it.
I mean, David, you've talked about the need to kind of get into the mind of the chef, but what about the other spaces you do? I mean, what about hotels or theaters? You know, what about when it's a much more public space for a lot of people?
In our case, it always starts with research, because there's a lot to research about the building, the location. In the case of a hotel, what the attitude wants to be. I think hotels are like, in some ways, a fantasy persona you can put on for the 2 or 3 nights you're staying there. And I think hotels really, you can tell a lot about someone in terms of what hotel they would pick in a given city. So this is a image of a project that is in Vancouver called the TED Theater. And I had been going to the TED conference for 15 years, and I had seen it go from 600 people in Monterey who were there to see a live experience to 2,000 people in Long Beach, where you were really watching an online experience. And the online experience was better than the live experience. And so it was an incredible, totally out of left field gift when the head of the TED conference said, we're going to move to Vancouver, and wondering if you can create a kind of set installation that will bring back some of the energy of the conference. And for me, it's a lesson in many things, but particularly how specifics can draw creating something that's very successful, drilling down in specifics. And so it's a 1,300-seat theater that has 10 different ways to sit. Because if you're at a conference for 5 days, you may want to sit up close, you may want to sit in the back. We found, and since it had to be demountable, it's certainly linked to work I had been researching for 10 years. We did an exhibit for the Building Museum on the Old Globe 10 years before, where I started to look at scaffolding and thinking about how live performance is a lot about the audience as well as what's happening on stage. So it's a huge amount of R&D into CNC. That's 8,000 pieces of locally sourced timber. The building sets up in 5 days and comes apart in 2 days and sets up every year. And there'd be no reason to have this theater exist forever, because that use of one talk for 1,300 people is so specific. So I think finding a universal design through specificity And then the thing that I didn't realize, we had planned to have a scrim on the outside of that, but when we were able to get the structure to line up so that it expressed the fact that it was temporary, how buildings sometimes look better when the scaffolding's up than when the scaffolding's down, that became a key.
All right, I mean, speaking of construction, we're actually running slightly low on time because I know we want to leave some time for the audience to ask you guys some questions, so I'm going to just skip quickly to that picture, because talking about construction, this is your lettuce dress.
That lettuce dress is quite an amazing, beautiful pattern. I wish I would have put the little icon that Ruben's drawn. It was done, I think, or one of the ones for the Cooper Hewitt Design Award, which I'm happy to say that I remember someone saying that you were in the picking and you thought, Isabel's good, she's got to be Godfather again. And the beauty of this dress is that it's a repetition of a shape. It's just about the fabric being gauze, being a gauze gazar, and just shifting it just a hairline over so that when they hang, they never hang one over the other. Because when you have one shape repeating, you end up, if you let them drop with gravity, they just fall one on top of the other and just becomes one solid mass. But by shifting it just even less than a quarter of an inch, all of a sudden all those waves sit just a little bit over, so then all that blossoming stays that way forever. It never falls on itself, it never collapses.
Was that hard to figure out? Did it take a while of experimenting?
Playing. I mean, that's the thing about our studio. It's really all about experimentation and prototypes. We're constantly testing things out for me, for Ruben, for just fabrics, constantly seeing new fabrics that make you imagine a new way of construction. I mean, the people that did the fabric for Michelle, they are a Swiss fabric house that bring me the most difficult fabrics to see what I would do with them. They just leave them there. And I just play with them and I test out different seams and then they sell them. So I mean, that's one of the things that is also very fulfilling for me, that I get to be a scientist of cloth. I like the feeling of not just creating dresses for the moment, but creating a language that is my language, my prototypes.
You both talked about the importance of delight, or creating delight in the person who wears your clothes, the person who's in your space. But how important is play for you each as creators, as designers? How important is it for you to play?
Totally critical for me. And you mentioned, do we think of ourselves as therapists? I don't think of myself as a therapist, but I do think of myself as in terms of the culture and people who work with me. Really creating a sense of play is totally critical, and harder when you have some success, and there's more to risk. And it's one of the reasons why I find lateral moves very interesting. The other thing about play is, one person's play is another person's work. And so I try to spend as much time as I can finding inspiration. Isabel talked about people bringing fabrics in. We have a library where every morning we have someone bringing a new material we don't know, and there's a sense of playfulness that leads to kind of zeroing in on the solution.
Yeah, I mean that's how you discover. It isn't play in a way. It is. I always see it as very serious. Ruben's always playing, but it's being able to, I do want to always look at things from another perspective.
I think play doesn't, right? Play sometimes has like a pejorative, like you're wasting time. But I think it's really about doing something where you don't know where it's going to end.
Yeah. I mean, we are doers. I mean, we're both very involved in the make. I'm very involved in the make of what I do. And my playtime is very much in my head, funny enough. I can sit in a place for hours thinking and feeling, and then I apply that to fabric. It's very unusual, but I somehow imagine how this cloth is going to perform if I do something with it, even before I do it. Because sometimes you just take it and it does what it wants to do. And if you think about it, I dream on it something.
The thing about play is I think it implies not being in such a hurry. That you know, things take a while to happen, to gestate, and you know, the linear trying to just go right to the problem is never the best way to get to the solution.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I have one final question, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. So I hope everyone in the audience is busy, like scribbling down their notes, so you can challenge these guys afterwards. A couple years ago.
That doesn't sound very playful.
It's very playful. A couple years ago, David, you wrote a book called What If? So my last question is, what if you could make anything? What would it be?
Well, it's an impossible question. Because the truth is, if I could freeze things the way they are now, I love our project mix. I love the people I get to work with, but I've learned that that doesn't, you know, much as I think about things that are permanent and temporal, I think you have to be open to what's next. This is an image of the shed where I'm partnered with Dillo Scofidio Renfro on a new cultural institution that's opening next March on the High Line that we began 10 years ago. That had anyone said, what do you want to do next? I never would have been audacious enough to say that. So I think you have to be open to what are the ideas, but it certainly links to a lifelong interest in things that transform and move. The building transforms and moves. It's a lifelong interest in creative potential. Like, I love to walk into a theater and stand on stage before anything's happened, because the fly loft and that sense of potential is magical. And so in some ways, this building's about potential. Hopefully, we'll find what those next things are going to be.
Oh, my book, huh? That opened the door to meeting so many people that had nothing to do with fashion. I mean, it also gave me the opportunity to put down my story, maybe as an immigrant, maybe as a woman, but just being able to also especially younger students, and a different way of entering the fashion world, because our you know, how we've entered this world is totally different. Self-made, I mean, we just push forward. And that gave us the opportunity to meet all these different people that had nothing to do with fashion and had never worn any of my pieces or even knew that I made fashion. But somehow, maybe through the Inauguration, had a connection to who I was and came to a lot of the book signings, and the book did really, really well, and it's still being sold.
Would you do another one?
Sure. No, we do. I mean, usually with exhibits on it, like FIT, we have publications, but it's mostly on the work. A memoir. I mean, this was something that they brought to me, and I thought, what, are you kidding me? I'm not a writer. But it was interesting to put down our trajectory and how we arrived at where we had been, because it's so incredible to know that I dressed Michelle Obama, and it was such an important moment. And we literally started out just taking clothes from my closet and selling them. So there was so much there to teach or to present for someone else to see it as a possibility. And I think I really got a lot of people to react to the book. It's very simple. I mean, it's easy to read, and it just gave me an opportunity to present myself outside of fashion.
Okay, so guys, who has a question? We have 2 microphones on either side, and either aisle. If you could walk up and speak into them.
Oh, now I see you.
You get there first.
David, I was, of course, thrilled to hear about agency in architecture and how you took this step of agency with the viewing platform. And I see that again in The Shed, right? That was a project that you and Liz had to argue for. But I think that what I want to hear from both of you is, at a time that's deeply political, your sense of agency and activism now, and how that enters into your work, and has that affected the kind of projects that you're initiating doing?
Well, the work that's always interested me in terms of self-generated has always been around where I think I can make a difference. And Isabel and I actually met through DIFFA, Design Industry Foundation Fighting AIDS, where I got on board for many reasons, seeing the creative world decimated, but losing my brother to AIDS in '93, I got more active and became chairman in '94. And the biggest inspiration for me was how designers don't realize that the act of making is helpful. And that's what DIFFA really did for many people, is it created a platform where you could make a difference. So in terms of what's going on in the world and how we can be politically active to make a difference, there are areas where Vanessa mentioned play, and playgrounds came out of the viewing platform because the city asked, was there a second project I wanted to do with the foundation we set up? And I didn't quite realize that was a possibility. I spent a year trying to build an arts institution called the Incubator on Fulton Street that had a lot of overlaps to the Shed. And I remember when I was told by someone within the city, that'll never happen, it's a fantasy. I was horrified that we had spent this money. We raised money, we got Naked Angels, the Public Theater, all these groups involved. And I said, you know, we should have just given the city a playground. And someone I work with said, well, what would that playground be like? And I started to go back to what was life-giving for me in terms of learning to play and make. Yeah. So, you know, I think that it is a moment in which encouraging people to participate, to get out of whatever virtual days they're in, and jump into the real world and make a difference as designers. I believe that was important then, and I believe that's important now.
Yeah, and I think, especially when you think of activism, I think my thing is to keep doing what I do. That's being enough of an activist, because I'm an independent, I'm a woman, I do all these things that it's almost not seen anymore. I mean, I'm almost a relic in a strange way. And being involved always hands-on from the very beginning, you're not being seen being a participator, but even in DIFFA or before DIFFA with the AIDS crisis, we were very much involved in the nightclubs trying to raise money for friends, and you were really involved in the moment and trying to do something out of the view of anyone. So you're always, I mean, it's New York, you're always a part of.
One other quick thing I want to add to that, because you mentioned, last summer I had the incredible privilege of working in the park, Shakespeare in the Park, and did 3 shows there. And talk about extraordinary to see and that was the infamous Julius Caesar that had some political issues regarding the portrayal of Julius Caesar. But I was so moved by, first of all, the 100 interns, however many interns there are, working in the public theater, unbelievable. They believe anything can happen. And then every night to have 2,000 people come in for free, that was a very powerful experience for me.
So it is people driven. I mean, you get involved with everyone around you and you just keep pushing. And my way of being not an activist, but we don't have cell phones. I mean, Ruben and I don't have a cell phone. We've never had cell phones. That's my way of being anti what's happening, because in a way, we see it around us all the time.
And everything Isabel and Ruben does attains a level of art. Every note you get, there's a consciousness about the creative process in every molecule.
Thank you. That was what I was trying to say.
Okay, so
no, it's just human driven. It's really. doesn't have a face, it has an emotion. Okay.
Isabel, in August of 2014, you were out to dinner with your longtime friend, Bill Cunningham, and Bill had expressed to you his concern that young people going forward were not going to be interested in fashion, that they were so involved with their cell phones and their electronics and their iPads. Has that come to happen, or have they embraced fashion nowadays?
Oh, Bill. He cried. So did I. No, just kidding. You know, if they're passionate about what they're doing, it will affect fashion. And fashion is in everybody's lives because we get up every morning and we get dressed. So there's no way of... The creation of fashion is what's been affected in a way. Now, I'm very much about creating fashion from a three-dimensional perspective, and most people on a computer, it's very much about the flat. So you're not exposed to the tactile, you know, the feeling of fabrics and the emotion of a fabric and what it will do on the body. All those things Bill was very concerned about, that we were not creating anymore for a three-dimensional world. It was all very flat. And of course, back to surprise, if somebody is passionate about looking through that computer and developing something, if there's passion and there's love, something comes out of it. I mean, it's a whole new way of creating. But he was worried.
Okay.
My question is for David, and I'm curious about how much of an acoustician you've become. Because it seems to me that every single building you do needs a different sound, and that's as much of a play as its look, from a noisy restaurant to a very quiet avenue for a talk or a theater.
What a great question. Well, we certainly, first of all, my earliest job was working for someone who does recording studios. And it sort of tuned me into the importance of that. And I think we've gotten better and smarter and more driven to find solutions that aren't the obvious ones. Because in many cases, you think about, I had an interesting experience yesterday. I went to Orso. The person I was waiting for was 25 minutes late. And I realized I've never looked at the room. I'm so busy doing what I'm doing. So I looked at the room, I listened to the room, and so I think, you know, part of what we do is studying what works really well. And we had a chance in Union Square Cafe, the new Union Square Cafe with Danny, who was willing to really drill down and invest in that to develop new materials that both feel warm but absorb sound. And I think that's something we try to constantly study. We just renovated the Helen Hayes Theater, which was known in 1912, before the balcony was added, as having the most incredible acoustics. 1920, the balcony was added. We spent quite a bit of time understanding what are the variables. As an architect, the question is, what are the variables? So we're studying it more and more and getting better and better at it. And I've also gotten back to playing piano in the last year and a half. And that's really created a kind of new awareness of sound for me.
You won't believe it, but I even get involved in sound with cloth. So sound is a big part of it.
Explain.
Well, the sound of taffeta, you can hear it. The fall of a jersey, you can feel it. But sound is something that I do love in cloth. The ruffling of the sound of the fabric is something that affects you.
Do you put on your own clothes?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you try them all out?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I'll even do it on Ruben.
We were talking before about most people don't realize the design of a set is very influenced by acoustics, a
Right.
set that projects the sound the way the director wants. And that was a sort of new lesson for me.
Any other questions?
Something back that you were speaking about earlier with theater and both of your fields. When your design is in service of a narrative or a story, how do you balance your desire to make something bold and seen and a statement, but not a distraction? And where does that conversation start? and what does it look like, and how is it different in different projects that you've had?
There's a great saying that a director once said to me, and that is, don't put a hat on a hat. So as a set designer, what you don't want to do is duplicate what everyone else is doing. So you're really creating the world. And you know, it's a very good question, is because in a play, in previews, if it's not working, the first thing the director will say is the set's not funny enough, or the lighting's not funny enough. You know, that every element gets put under the microscope. So I think what you can do is take it all into account and then have a kind of moment where you conjure some world that isn't duplicating what the play is, but like a setting for a jewel sets it in the right direction. And I also think that backstory is critical. You know, in architecture, we're looking at elaborate backstories that may have to do with all kinds of things we've researched that the person in the building never has to be aware of, but it anchors you in a world in which no design decision is arbitrary.
I think I'm totally driven by the actor himself. I mean, or herself. It's about the emotion of this person and what they're feeling the most comfortable with, and not overpowering them. And then I really get very much influenced by the set, because I want to feel I am completing the painting. I want to make sure that they all come together. And I wait until I find that moment that I feel I can now be the last little ding. Once the set is down, I feel now I see the world that I'm going to be dressing. And I've reacted to all the actors that are going to be performing. The director, of course, is, although I've had an amazing experience, that the director just really lets me do what I feel. And I try not to get in the way of the performer, but I do know enough my craft that I think what I concentrate on is creating something that the actor feels so great in, and that they have been pampered to death, that they've been thought of when they're wearing these garments, that they can project and be a part of the painting, the moving painting.
Okay.
So,
next question.
Hi, you know, this question's for both of you. We've seen some examples of some of your earliest works, and I'm curious about the creative process. Back then, you had a particular way, things that stimulated you or inspired you, and has that process or stimulation changed at all today? I mean, from then to today, is it different?
It's different, I guess, for a designer, because you're always, what I make is I dress people, I dress myself, and I dress, it's about, for me, would be more fabric access. In the very beginning, that's why I call it my elementary stage, because most of the garments were made either in denim, very practical, very hands-on, very user-friendly fabrics, and that influenced a lot my work. And interestingly enough, it was just right for the times, because I got Fifth Avenue windows at Bergdorf Goodman's with all denim garments. They were it was a good time for showing what I was showing. And then when I went to Paris, that was also then a whole other thing for me, that fabrics changed. I started using a lot more precious fabrications. But always the studio is, I work with a group of women that make clothes according to how I want to make them. So that just grows. It doesn't change, it grows. It grows depending on fabrications and where I'm going to do a presentation, but it's not the same as a building, I have to admit.
I would just mean, it's all quite different for me. And as strange as it sounds, I don't really think until we did the book, What If, I totally understood that my interest in work in theater and my interest in work in architecture so intersected, which opened up opportunities like the TED Theater came out of an observation that those two interests intersected in a way I hadn't really, been even fantasize that that would happen. So it's been an unbelievably great revelation for me. And I think it's fueled other work. The other thing that's changed is I think I've gotten better at trying to define what are the key elements, what's the DNA of the project that has to survive, and what are the things you edit out. Where I think when you start out, you sort of want every idea you ever thought of in the project. And so I think that just comes from more experience.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for one final question, so you are the lucky winner.
Yay. So you guys spoke about design as problem solving, and obviously there's a lot of observation and research that goes into solving that problem. Where, if at all, does personal expression come into play or point of view?
Well, all over the place.
Yeah.
Look, I think any really smart designer can rationalize that they solved the problem. Right. They can post-rationalize that they solved a different problem. So I think I think the research has to begin long before the project. It's sort of how you're inspired in the world, what you look at out there. But I think every element is, some version of personal expression. And I think then there are pieces that you recognize that are a continuation of your work, that you find other ways to express. But for instance, lighting, how things take light. I think about your work in the theater, and it's really humbling, though, as a set designer. A lighting designer may have a very different idea, and that could ruin what your vision is, although it may make their vision happen. So personal expression is expressing that in clear enough terms with the whole team, both in a building to set that whatever your idea is, your personal idea is strong enough to survive every part of reality. Budget, construction, the dog ate your homework, whatever those are.
No, I totally agree. I think you spend all your years developing your own identity, your own DNA. And no matter what you do, what is the project that comes along, they come to you because of that DNA and what it is that you've been, it identifies with you. What is it that your work is like? And I think for everything, no matter what fashion, what fabric, what collection, it always has your DNA. I mean, and when I work with different collaborations, you can always, you push for your perspective, and it's what you do. It's why they came to you. And also it's important that you bring your identity to the project so that it's a richer project. Even when there's so many people involved, it becomes a richer project. It's important to have, for many years, you develop an identity. I think that's the most important thing that we have an identity, we have a DNA, we have a body of work, a language, I always call it. My dresses are letters. And you take those patterns and you switch them around and you create another sentence, another poem with your, but it's always you're always building towards a language. I always, even with students, when they start their first garments or sketches, I always say, make sure you keep absolutely everything, because you'll never be the same again. And you need to make sure you look at what you were thinking. Even if you think at one point, oh my God, there's so much raw idea in your beginning that it just gives you your point of view forever. You'll eventually see how you have a language.
I often tell students, that one of the jobs is to keep all the idiosyncratic edges you have and not have those rubbed off.
Yes.
To be like some other person that you're.
Because you don't stay raw for long.
I mean, it's pretty much the definition of what distinguishes a great designer from everyone else. I think it's the thing that makes you you, the thing that makes you special, the ability to have your own voice. And it's what makes each of you so special. So thank you very much.
Thank you.